the honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Pleasure to be here today. Pleasure to speak on this. What I would start with today, Madam Speaker, is, while I'll be sharing my views here and my time with the member from Red Deer Mountain View, I wanted to tell you something. Something I heard earlier struck me funny. Members from the government have said that the Conservatives are taking the country back to the Stone Age. I just ate off a wooden fork. A wooden fork was created by the Byzantine Empire, by the Romans, actually, like during the Roman period, of the 4th century. I just ate off a wooden fork. Do you know how unpleasant that was? And it may have even been created by the Greeks in the ancient world much earlier than the 4th century by the Romans. The interesting thing enough, and I know the member from Manitoba is going to love what I'm about to say, they say we're taking them to the Stone Age. The government is putting Canadians back to the Ice Age, and it came before the Stone Age. Back when everything was freezing cold. That's what they've done to Canadians. And in this speech today, Madam Speaker, I will cover the negative impact of the carbon tax on farmers, First Nations, and families. Let's start with First Nations. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to represent 4 First Nations in Miramichi Grand Lake: Mattapanagia, Eel Ground, Eskanobinich, and Elsipogtuk. One of the proudest moments of my career was to be named the first ever standalone Aboriginal Affairs Minister for the great province of New Brunswick. It was an honor and a privilege to work with the 15 First Nations chiefs, many of whom are here in Ottawa for the election of the new AFN chief. And I'll congratulate Ms. Cindy Woodhouse on her election today. I've gotten to spend time with many Indigenous leaders this week who have told me how frustrated they are, Madam Speaker, after 8 years of failed Liberal policies. One of the greatest myths in our country and in our time is that the Liberal Party of Canada is a friend to Indigenous peoples. That is a myth, and I will explain that mythology to you now, Madam Speaker, and to the people watching. If you can't get Indigenous peoples adequate drinking water, then don't call them your friends, because that's a necessity of life, and they've failed at that endeavor at every single element of that endeavor. And as another example, Madam Speaker, the Ontario First Nations and the Attawabaskat First Nation are taking the Liberal government to court over the unfair carbon tax. They argue that the Liberal government's failed policy unjustly and disproportionately burdens their communities that already face hardships because of a lack of basic infrastructure and severe poverty. Once again, I'm sharing my time with the minister from Red Deer, the Earl of Red Deer. The chiefs of Ontario and Attawabaskat have tried to engage and negotiate with the Liberal government to no avail. So now, Madam Speaker, they must unnecessarily spend money on lawyers to take the Liberal government to court. These residents do not have the money to install retrofits, such as heat pumps. Many First Nations are remote and lack basic infrastructure, such as clean drinking water, as aforementioned, and they do not have access to viable alternatives, such as cleaner burning fuels or public transportation, just like many residents in Miramichi Grand Lake. The claim that the carbon tax is revenue neutral was always a claim about what the government would take in, not what consumers would actually be paying. The Liberal government wants you to believe they can keep increasing taxes and you will still end up with more money in your pocket. But not the farmers, not First Nations, or the families who are heating their homes in this country. Madam Speaker, I'm blessed to have 4 children who are very active. We need all hands on deck on the weekends, taking them to events that can occur across the province. My mother assists my wife on most days when I'm here, and sometimes my dad as well, and they're both 66 years old. There was a weekend when my daughter was in St. John for a gymnastics championship. That's a 6-hour round trip from Blackville, where I reside. One of my son's high school hockey teams won a provincial tournament played in St. Leonard, New Brunswick. the home of my good friend Senator Percy Mockler. It was an exciting final game, but an 8-hour round-trip drive. So if you live in rural areas like Miramichi-Grand Lake and need to drive the kids to sporting, arts, or cultural events, then you know the painful impact the carbon tax is having, because you're paying more every single time you fill up your car or your truck. And Madam Speaker, unfortunately, some children who played sports prior to the carbon tax are now not playing those sports because the parents can't keep up with the costs. It's very real. It's happening in my community. It's happening in First Nations communities. Most people in my area have at least 2 vehicles. One is usually a truck. And let me be clear, they're not electric. But that's another story for another day. People are struggling. I attended the Finance Committee's pre-budget consultation in Fredericton not long ago, this fall. The head of the largest food bank in Fredericton told us they saw a 35.7% increase in use last year. Across Canada, there were nearly 2 million food bank visits in 2023, the highest food bank use in Canadian history. Canadians are being forced to use food banks because of the Liberals government's out-of-control inflationary spending. It's driving up the cost of everything, Madam Speaker. And on top of this, the Liberal carbon tax is driving up the cost of food even further. Canada's Food Price Report predicts food costs for a typical family of 4 will rise by $700 in 2024. This is on top of an increase of $1,065 2023. Think about it. Think about it, Madam Speaker. The typical family of 4 is going to pay $1,700 or more for groceries in just 2 years than they were already paying. The carbon price's negative impact on food inflation is real. Meat is up 5 to 7%, vegetables 5 to 7%, baked goods are up 5 to 7%. That's why we are calling on the Liberal government to take the tax off farmers, First Nations, and home heating for families. Farmers are being left out in the cold, Madam Speaker, by the NDP Liberal coalition, who are desperate to prevent farmers from getting a carbon tax carve-out for grain drying, barn heating, and other farm operations. The Liberal carbon tax will continue to go up every year, increasing the pain felt by farmers, First Nations, and families. For my Miramichi-Grand Lake constituents, the upcoming choice will be clear. A choice between the costly coalition of the NDP and Liberals who take your money, tax your food, punish your work, and double your housing costs. A common consent Conservative government that will axe the tax is the only choice for Canadians. It's the only choice for farmers, it's the only choice for families, and it's the only choice for First Nations. On the topic of farmers, you know, it's interesting, Madam Speaker. I spent a lot of time on a file recently with the National Capital Commission. I mean, here's a group that had to tear down an old stable, and instead they replaced it with an $8 million barn, laced with the best fiber op on planet Earth, with an elevator that goes down under the ground, solar panels. It has all this luxury. It's a barn. It's a barn, Madam Speaker. Farmers right now need a carve-out on carbon tax so they can grow us the food that we need to stay healthy in this country. And we have a government that approved a budget of a corporation that built an $8 million barn. So I can tell you today, Madam Speaker, here's the choice. Miramichi-Grand Lake has a choice too in the upcoming election, and I'm proud to give it to them. A choice between the costly coalition of the NDP Liberals who take your money, take your food, tax your food, punish your work, and double your housing costs. A common consent Conservative government is the only choice because we will bring it home and we will axe the tax. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hear, hear.